After every census, the official population estimate for each region in the country is recalibrated using census counts. On 30th of August 2013, the ABS released a final set of estimates that have been through just this. They have been recalibrated, or what we call rebased, from the 2011 census. This new and improved set of estimates provide a more accurate measure of population across Australia and a stronger base for estimating population into the future. This video will take you through the main changes to those estimates. Part 2 of this video series will explain how the ABS has also made improvements to its historical population series. The census gives us the 5-yearly base for calculating ERP for each region in Australia, from the states and territories right down to the smaller sub-state geographies. We first determine where a person usually lives, which comes directly from the question on the census. There are then 3 main adjustments made to these census counts to turn them into population estimates. We adjust for those who weren't counted on census night and those who were counted more than once, based on information from the post-enumeration survey and also known as net undercount. We add in Australian residents who were temporarily overseas to arrive at an ERP as at census night. And because the census is held in August, a backdating adjustment is made to account for the population change between census night and the 30 June reference date. So to do this, we subtract births, we add deaths, and we remove the effect of net migration that occurred during this period. This results in an ERP for 30th of June of a census year for each region. This is now our population base. Previous population estimates are also recalculated to better align with the base estimate. So for example, estimates back to 2007 were also revised as part of the 2011 rebasing process. Both census counts and ERP are important tools in understanding and monitoring Australia's population, but it is essential to understand the differences between them. Census is a snapshot at a point in time, but contains a wide range of information. It's most useful for understanding population characteristics and dynamics, especially for small populations. Whereas we can only estimate basic demographic information, but we do this regularly. So ERP is most useful for monitoring change in population and providing a basic demographic profile. The first set of sub-state rebased population estimates are released around a year after the census. These estimates are called preliminary rebased. At this stage, the residents temporarily overseas and the backdating components, the births, deaths, and net migration, are not yet finalised. We just use the most up-to-date information we have at the time. Preliminary rebased estimates were released in July and August 2012 in the 2 products you can see on the screen. Around 2 years after the census, when all components that turn the census count into the ERP are finalised, we prepare another set of estimates, a final rebased version. There are 3 main differences between the preliminary and final rebased population estimates. Final estimates of Australians overseas on census night for each region were included. Final births, deaths, and migration data for each region were used to backdate the census night estimates to 30th of June. And we also incorporated a refined allocation of census undercount across the regions. The first main difference was the revision to the number of residents temporarily overseas. We obtained an updated count of RTOs at the national, state and territory level from the Department of Immigration and Citizenship. These counts were then distributed to SA2s based on updated information. The availability of final RTO information resulted in a revision to Australia's population by around 9,500 people, which, out of the whole country, was not a big difference. However, it varied quite substantially across SA2s. For example, Perth City had around 1,600 RTOs added to its census count, or around 5% of its population. St Kilda in Melbourne had just over 1,000 RTOs added, around 4% of its population. Some SA2s also had significant revisions to the number of RTOs between preliminary and final rebasing. Here are some examples. The largest upward revision was in Liverpool Warwick Farm in Sydney. It had a preliminary RTO figure of 800, which went up to 1,200 after final rebasing. We also underestimated the number of people overseas in the Busselton region in WA. Final rebasing showed that there was actually an extra 200 RTOs. Franklin had the largest reduction of the number of RTOs, and in fact so did most of the newly established areas in Gungahlin in the ACT. And in Victoria, Craigieburn-Mickleham also had a significant reduction in the number of RTOs, down by 500. The next difference between preliminary and final rebased ERP was the revisions to the backdating components. Substate births and deaths were revised to take into account late registrations, and with the migration components, preliminary estimates were effectively based on 2006 census data, but in final rebasing, we were able to use the 2011 census, using the question that asks you where you lived 1 year ago. Nationally, the overall backdating component for final rebasing was 39,000 people. This component varied across SA2s, and generally the large differences were due to the internal and overseas migration. Here are some examples of SA2s with significant revisions to the backdating components. East Pilbara had the largest downwards revision overall, and this was due to internal migration. Preliminary rebasing estimated there was hardly any population change at all, but final rebasing estimated 200 people. The 2006 migration information used in prelim rebasing didn't pick up the high levels of migration that we're seeing now. Surfers Paradise also had a significant downward revision. Again, preliminary components showed very little population change, but final rebasing showed there was around 130 people migrating to the area, from both within the country and overseas. The population change of Perth City was also underestimated in preliminary rebasing by around 100 overseas migrants. And South Morang had its components of population change overestimated by around 120 people. The third and last change in final rebasing was due to the refinement of the undercount allocation. The undercount is distributed to SA2s based on age, sex, part of state, and Indigenous status. This means, for example, all 15-year-old Indigenous males living in Darwin effectively have the same undercount as each other. In preliminary rebasing, all these variables were treated equally. The result of this was that some regions were getting too much undercount, with very little left for other areas. In final rebasing, we effectively allocated the undercount to regions in a two-tier process. Age and sex were used as primary factors, with Indigenous status a secondary factor, due to the relatively small proportion of the population who are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. The same total Indigenous and non-Indigenous part of state undercount was still assumed, but we've just improved the way the undercount was distributed across SA2s. Some SA2s have gone up because the preliminary share of undercount was estimated to be too low, and others have gone down because their undercount was estimated to be too high. But for most of Australia's regions, there was very little difference. Out of all SA2s, around 95% of them changed by less than 1%. It is important to note that it had no impact on part of state ERP, only for estimates below. This new method delivered a more demographically plausible set of estimates. We are more confident in the final rebased estimates because they align better with census and also external data sources used in our analysis. Now I'll show you how the share of undercount has changed across regions, looking at the states that had some of the larger changes. Here is rest of Queensland, where the darker blues represent very low undercount, up to darker reds, which are very high. So this is how the undercount was distributed to SA2s in preliminary rebasing and final rebasing. Here it is again, preliminary rebasing and final rebasing. So the reallocation has pushed some of the undercount from the less populated inland regions to the more populated areas towards the coast. The Indigenous areas up north, for example, Cape York and Carpentaria, still have high undercount given to them, just not as extreme as in preliminary rebasing. And South Australia, preliminary rebasing and final rebasing. So you can see a more even distribution of undercount applied across the state. Out of the whole country, APY lands in the northwest of the state had the largest reduction in undercount, going from 15% to 9%. And in WA, prelim and final. So again, you can see the share of the undercount is heading away from the more sparsely populated outback areas to the more populated ones towards the coast. Derby, West Kimberley and Halls Creek had some of the larger reductions, but you can see that they are still getting a much higher undercount than the rest of the state. On the other side, areas around Bunbury and Albany gained the most. So final rebased population estimates have provided a more accurate measure of population now, but also provides the best base for estimating population forward from 2011. Our annual population updates will continue to reference this 2011 base until information from the 2016 census is available. For information on how the ABS has improved historical estimates, please watch part 2 of this video series. Thanks for watching.